According to science, you were grown up when you were 25. But what does that mean? Is the inner child gone? Is it bye-bye easy living and hello cruel world? And what is a grown-up? Remember when you were a child. When we were children, we loved and admired our parents. We have all these sweet memories of experiencing lots of things for the first time. Memories of our toys, of our dreams, of our heroes. We thought that our dad was fantastic when he sang in the supermarket. When we become 15 or 16 years old, everything changes. Now it is so awkward when our dad starts singing and everything is a big deal. We start insulting or arguing with our parents, or lie to them, and feel no remorse because, of course, our parents are idiots. When we become 25, this changes again. Our parents seem to be back to normal, and most things in life start to make sense. Those teen years are so crazy, so confusing, and so amazing. But why? What is the reason? Is it pure biology, or is there an evolutionary reason to a wild youth?
My name is Lina. I was born in 1990. I have two younger brothers, and my parents have been married for almost 30 years. My mom is a teacher, and my dad is a dentist. My home was a safe haven, and my parents have always been very supportive. So I took up handball, karate, acting, sewing, playing the drums, singing, and football. I ended up studying journalism, which makes total sense. You are not an expert in one area, you're just really curious. I hitchhiked from Berlin to Paris, hung out with gangsters in Miami, and while growing up, I've been in love many times. So I guess I'm pretty normal. When I look back, I realize I often felt like a spectator observing my own life. I wonder what that was all about.
When are we grown-ups? When is the brain mature? This has been widely debated by scientists for generations. Experimental studies of children, teenagers, and grown-ups have revealed that the brain is fully developed by the age of 25, although brain development is subject to significant individual variation. In contrast to previous generations, a new method called functional MRI allows scientists to look into the brain. Perhaps some of the answers can be found in the structure and function of the brain. But who are these scientists, and what have they learned? Have they gained knowledge to questions that have puzzled mankind for generations? Have they figured out why adolescence is so wild and fantastic? One of these scientists is Dr. Adriana Galvan. Adriana has studied the development that the brain undergoes from the early teens and into the 20s, and how this brain development influences our behavior.
According to science, I'm a grown up now. It's really scary.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? What does that mean?
Good question. What does that mean? I think a lot about what does maturity really mean? And maybe another way to think about maturity is that it's another word for competence. And so maybe what we mean is that at a certain age, you will be competent to make decisions, for instance. You will be competent to understand other people's perspectives. But we still don't have a precise definition of an age of of maturity.
So, Adriana, when we're teenagers, people ask us, like, what is going on in your head?
Mhm.
And you've looked inside the teenage brain. So,
Yeah.
what is actually going on in there?
There's a lot going on in there. The major things that are going on is that the brain is getting reshaped. It's not to say that the brain isn't already structurally in place by the time people are teenagers, but the way the brain is responding to the environment, to interacting with friends, and having greater conflicts maybe with parents is changing. So the connections between regions in the front of the brain and in the deeper layers of the brain are constantly being reshaped.
We have a lot of conflicts with our parents. Why is that?
Well, it's a characteristic of being an adolescent to want to find your own independence, to really try to become autonomous from caregivers or parents or educators. And one way to do that is through conflict and to separate yourself either physically or emotionally. And we see this not just in humans, but other animals like monkeys or rodents, they also start to distance themselves from the primary caregivers during the period right after puberty.
So, what is the function of what is going on in our brain?
During adolescence, the brain is designed to help us learn to think for ourselves. And that often happens by making some mistakes and learning through trial and error and identifying what will help us think for ourselves and identifying what will make us feel confident and independent from others.
So, how does the teenage brain mature?
The teenage brain matures from the back to the front. The back of the brain is represents the functions that we need very early in life, like crawling, like walking, like talking, breathing, and the regions in the front of the brain that don't finish developing until about the mid-20s are the regions that help us make decisions, think about abstract things, maybe like religion or time. And they don't develop until later in life, perhaps because we don't need those skills as infants. During that time, our parents serve as our prefrontal cortex. The pruning process that happens around the time of adolescence helps us refine the prefrontal cortex in the regions that help us make decisions and exert good self-control.
Pruning?
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell me what that is?
Pruning is a really important process in development. And the most pruning happens during adolescence. It refers to the process of eliminating connections in the brain that aren't useful. So up until we reach puberty, there's an increase in something called synapses. And synapses refer to the connections between neurons. Around the time of puberty, we start to prune away the synapses or the connections that aren't necessary. An example of pruning is the process of language development. So early in life, we have a lot of connections in our language regions that would help us learn any language that we're born into. But after about the first or second year of life, we start to only listen or hear one language. And so as we get older, we become better and better at our own language and worse at other languages. And that worsening is an example of the pruning process, that we're pruning away the connections that would be necessary for learning other types of languages. Pruning also goes hand in hand with strengthening existing connections that we need. So we strengthen the connections that represent our own native language.
So now that we know this, could you say that the teenagers have a biological excuse for lacking self-control and judgment?
I wouldn't say that teenagers have a biological excuse because excuse suggests that we shouldn't hold them accountable, or it suggests that we shouldn't expect them to exert good self-control. Understanding the adolescent brain doesn't give them a biological excuse, but it helps us understand how we can help adolescents make good decisions in situations where it's better for them or more beneficial for them to think about the consequences of their actions. The things we did makes us who we are now. So it would be unfortunate if we robbed teenagers of the opportunity to be teenagers.
When we are young, the brain undergoes a major reconstruction. Everything is shuffled around and rewired, and new areas of the brain take control. The last part of the brain that matures is the prefrontal cortex, and this part of the brain is important for assessing risk, thinking ahead, self-evaluation, setting goals, and regulating emotions. In a way, it teaches the rest of the brain the rules about how the world works. We have to be fully functional and act responsibly at the same time as all the furniture is being moved around. You feel caught up between being young and adult. It's confusing. There must be some kind of evolutionary advantage that explains this craziness. We are at the top of our game during the teen years, and the more we feed our brain, the more it can contain. But again and again, we overestimate our own capabilities, resulting in an endless number of mistakes. This means that even the smartest teenagers will do the stupidest things in the most impulsive way. This happens in particular when we are with our friends. Everything is much easier, much better, much clearer with them. Friends understand you. With friends, we kind of own the world. Kings and queens for a day. We take crazy risks that we would never do on our own. Why is that? Do we do it to impress our friends? Professor Lawrence Steinberg has used his life to study adolescent risk-taking. If anyone knows why we take so many risks when we are young, it is Professor Steinberg.
What is it with our brain in that age that makes us so risk-seeking?
Around the time of puberty, because of the effect of sex hormones on the brain, adolescents become more pleasure-seeking, more reward-seeking. So one of the things that sex hormones do is to increase activity of a neurotransmitter called dopamine. There's more dopamine activity in the reward center of the brain during adolescence than any other time of life. Now, dopamine plays many roles in the brain, but one of the most important is our experience of pleasure. So whenever we anticipate something good happening, or when we actually feel something good, we get a little dopamine squirt. And that dopamine is what makes us feel the pleasure. And dopamine plays a role in the feeling of pleasure no matter what the reason is. So it's important when we eat, when we have sex, when we get money, when we get praise. It all activates the brain's reward center. Now, during adolescence, because there's so much activity in the brain's reward center, things that feel good feel even better. Okay?
Yeah.
So now, imagine that you're a teenager and you have a reward center in your brain that's very active, and you're going to be on the lookout for rewards. You're going to be looking for where is the next one coming from. And this pushes kids to do things, even when there may be risks involved, because they're so anxious to get the reward. While this is happening, the prefrontal cortex is still maturing. So during adolescence, you have this combination of the reward center, which makes us want to go after these exciting things, and the prefrontal cortex, which isn't ready yet for that. So what we say is, it's like a car with the accelerator pressed down to the floor, but not a good braking system in place.
Oh, so I hit the speeder really hard, but I don't have the brake yet?
Or you have the brake, but they're not very good yet.
Okay.
I
can relate to that, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And that's what adolescence is. Now, when we mature into adulthood, the brain's reward centers become less active. So we don't get as much pleasure out of things as teenagers do.
So nothing will ever feel this good again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's sad.
Yeah, so that counts for love, sex, food.
Yes, everything.
Oh, I'm 25 now. So
Yeah, it's all
what does
downhill
that
from
mean?
here.
Damn, Lawrence. I guess you can say that in the eyes of nature, group pressure is a good thing.
There is an evolutionary advantage to being a risk taker when you're an adolescent. we can look at other species, and what we see in other species is that when the young animal goes through puberty, it then goes out and ventures away from its family to become independent, to search for a mate, to reproduce. And think about this. This is a very dangerous thing to do. And you're competing with animals who are bigger and stronger and smarter than you. But it's necessary. So we believe that the risk-taking behavior that we see in young people is hardwired. It's part of our evolutionary history. It served a valuable purpose a long time ago. Not so valuable today, but lots of things that we see in human behavior today were things that evolved a long time ago, but that are still part of our genes.
So, if there hadn't been teenagers in the past taking all of these risks, where do you think we would be today?
Well, we wouldn't be here today because teenage risk-taking, we think, was essential for humans to reproduce and to continue to evolve.
Why is the presence of peers so influential?
One hypothesis is that the teenagers are taking risks to impress their friends. And people said, well, of course, everybody knows that teenagers take risks when they're with their friends. They're trying to impress their friends. So our research team said, can we find some adolescents who are not capable of thinking about what their friends want? In other words, who wouldn't be doing anything to try to impress their friends because they're not capable of thinking that way. So we did this study with mice. And the test was this. If we put them in a cage and we give them access to alcohol to drink, how much would they drink? We have the adolescent mice and we have the adult mice. And within each age group, we take half of them and we test them by themselves. And we take the other half and we test them with their peers, with the mice that they grew up with. And what we found was really remarkable. The adolescent mice drink more alcohol when they're with other mice than they do when they're by themselves. The adult mice drink the same amount when they're with other mice as when they're by themselves. So what does this tell us? We don't think that the mouse is drinking alcohol to impress its friends, right? So it's something other than that. So we think that the same thing is going on in the adolescent mouse brain, which is that when I'm near my friends, it lights up my reward centers and it makes me seek more rewards. And so this seems to be an aspect of adolescence that may have been conserved across different species, that may be an important part of our evolutionary history as mammals.
So the reason why I did so many stupid things when I was 18
Yeah.
was really me trying to find a mate, have sex, and get the best babies.
In a way, yeah, I'm sure that that wasn't your conscious reason for doing the stupid things. You were taking risks and behaving recklessly because you were satisfying that part of your brain that wants you to go out and find a mate and reproduce.
So in a way, you can say that you kind of need to take some chances while you're a teenager, because it's all part of nature's master plan.
It is normal for teenagers to do things where they do screw up. It doesn't mean that something's wrong with them. They're acting the way teenagers are supposed to act.
We are driven by rewards, and our reward center is at its peak when we are young. This is hard to absorb when you have just turned 25 and found out that those days will never come back. What about love, family, friendship, happiness, good and evil, guilt and innocence, ambition, power, revolution, war, the individual against society, climate catastrophes, success and failure, American presidents, murder, suicide, sex, drugs, death, and God? Should all this matter less when we get older? Is 25 the peak and everything is downhill from there? Do we really become less sad or less happy as we grow old and grey? Life goes up and down, and I guess it will always be like this, like waves on the ocean. Sometimes you are surfing the crest of a wave, other times you feel like you are drowning. We fight to keep our head above water, looking for that next kick, that next experience, that feeling of joy. Basically, we just want to feel good, feel happy. But what is it that makes us happy? And what is happiness? Professor Daniel Nettle had difficulty feeling happy when he was young, and because of that, he has dedicated his life to study happiness.
I'm Danish, and we are supposedly the happiest people in the world. But what is happiness?
When we talk about happiness in psychology, we don't mean, I'm so happy, I'm smiling all the time, and I'm singing and I'm dancing around. We mean that if you reflect on your life, you're pretty satisfied with how it's going. Yes, there are some bad times, but they're balanced by the good times. And overall, you kind of take the view that your life is satisfactory. It's progressing in a way you feel content with. And that's really what we talk about when we talk about happiness.
Is it the same things that make us happy throughout life, or does it change?
If something makes me happy and you try and do it on the view that, oh, that will make me happy as well, it probably won't, right? Because we're just very different people. So you have to recognize that everyone is different, but also you're different at different times in your life. When you're young, you're working out a whole lot of businesses to do with status and love and sex and, social relationships and stuff. And maybe when you're older, those priorities change a little bit.
I can be very self-critical, and it's hard for me to let go of my mistakes.
Yeah.
So do you think I can change that?
Well, it will probably become easier to deal with at time. For a start, you'll have more mistakes, right? So you can't remember them all, and time will go by, and you can reflect on things, and there's more to reflect on. Relative to other people of your same age, the more anxious person when they're 25 will probably be the more anxious person when they're 50, but both of them will probably, in absolute terms, have become less anxious, if you see what I mean.
Does our teenage years shape our personality, or are we born with a certain personality?
Well, I think personality is something that kind of sticks to you as time goes by. I think a lot of it's with you at the beginning, and a lot of it happens in early childhood. So you can think of it as kind of gradually attaching to you or solidifying as you go on. But certainly the teenage years are an important time.
Can you predict, by looking at a teenager, whether he or she will become a happy adult?
Well, on average, you can, right? So, all teenagers go through periods of being unhappy, right? So really the right comparison is, compared to other people of that age, where were they? And if they were very troubled and unhappy, that's not going to go away, right? It might be the case that everyone becomes a bit less troubled as they move into adulthood. Of the teenagers, the one who was the most troubled will probably be the most troubled adult. But that's on average, right? These are all statistical predictions. So you shouldn't kind of go around with thinking, oh, well, this personality research says this, that means I'm doomed or something, That's not the case.
What is personality?
I think all of us understand that people are enormously different from each other. Just think of two of your friends and think, let's say, I have a big disaster. You just know that from one of your friends is going to be incredibly angry about this, and the other one would say, oh, whatever. And that, in a nutshell, is what personality is. We can't look into someone's brain and say, here's the bit that determines how they respond to bad news. So what we try and do is we just come up with measures, questionnaires we can complete, tasks we can complete that we think predict how a person's going to be in different situations.
Is there a link between personality and happiness?
Oh, for sure. Personality is one of the biggest determinants of happiness, right? And people often think that happiness is, having a big car or something. But generally, once you've got a big car, you just want a bigger car. So it's not really going to make a lot of difference, right? Okay. But I think, how we are, how we think about life, huge determinant of how happy we are. And how we think about life, a big part of it comes from our personality. So, yeah.
Why are some of us able to feel spectacularly happy and others are just like, whatever?
Any biological system, there's going to be some variation, right? We can't all be identical because we've got slightly different genes and slightly different development. all of us would feel anxious if a man with a gun was running down the road, but some of us, it will be a slightly bigger response than others. That's all it is.
Why has nature designed it that way? That some of us get really scared by the man with the gun and others stay and fight, maybe?
Well, nature doesn't really design things. Generally, there's a lot of sources of variation, like genes mutate. So we all, roughly speaking, have the same genes, but I have some slightly different variants than you do. And then as these systems get set up through our lives, it's a chance process. It's not like making a car on a production line. It's much more like making a cake. Right? When you make a cake, sometimes the flour's a bit different, sometimes the eggs are a bit different, sometimes the oven's a bit different. Your cakes are never quite the same. It's the same basic idea, but it's always going to be variable. So I don't think of nature as designing so much as eliminating the extremes. What do we know? Well, nature has made nobody that has no capacity for anxiety. I don't think those kind of people are going to survive very long. And I don't think nature has made anyone who has no capacity for joy, right? Because again, that presumably was disadvantageous. But in the middle, there's a whole load of different ones of us who have slightly different cakes. And you've got to sort of make the best of the cake you have, I think.
If you could give your teenage self an advice on how to live a happy life,
yes,
what would that be?
I think the main thing I would say is there's much more time than you realize. Lighten up, right? Enjoy that phase of your life. The other phases will come and you'll solve those problems when you get there. So, enjoy what's good about being young.
Would you say our teen years are a happy time of our life, or?
It's a time of your life when you're doing lots of things for the first time. You're learning at a rate you're never going to learn again in future. And you're having all these vivid experiences that are going to stay with you for the rest of your life, and you'll look back on and really enjoy and value. So it's not all a negative period by any means.
Nettle says there is plenty of time for mistakes and fuck-ups. Time for growing into a milder and rounder version of yourself. When you were 25, it feels like your cake is still in the oven, like you haven't even started to eat yet. Lawrence said you had eaten most of it and only the crumbs are left. Nettle gives the feeling that the cake is still in the oven. The scent is filling the room, and there is lots of time for eating. Does the adolescent brain work differently to an adult brain? Experiments conducted in Professor Sarah Jane Blakemore's laboratory in England show that adolescents have difficulty seeing things from an adult's perspective. So when they throw their shoes on the floor and leave a mess in the kitchen, it is not to provoke the parents. They simply do not think about the emotion their behavior causes in their parents' minds. Their brain is focused on themselves. And with the adolescent boiler room of rewards and emotions, it is easy to understand that it can be hard to also take into account the emotions of others. We get better controlling our feelings and our sense of happiness when we are older, but when we are young, it seems hard to control these emotions. Everything just feels so intense. Why is this? Dr. Jennifer Silvers looks inside the brain whilst we are feeling emotions to try to understand how these evolve during adolescence.
Our emotions when we're teenagers are really intense. Why do you think that is?
Basically everything changes. The rug kind of gets pulled out from under you. So your social world changes. Suddenly you've got all of these new challenges with having to direct yourself in the world in a way that you didn't used to when you could rely on your parents. Hormones change, your brain changes. You're literally looking different each day that you look in the mirror. And I think all this comes together at the same time that you've got this increased self-awareness and the ability to really think about what the world around you means. And that's kind of a perfect combination for feeling intense emotions.
What's the reason why it feels so intense? Like the physical reaction, why is it that strong?
Adolescents don't necessarily have parents who are there to kind of regulate and manage every emotional experience they have in the same way that children are. And they're also just facing more emotional challenges, I think, than children are on a daily basis. And there's some really interesting research that supports that idea that adolescents are simply facing more in their everyday lives.
Yeah, so it's kind of a bomb being dropped on you and you're just standing there like, no, why is this all happening at the same time?
I think sometimes it feels like that, but it's also really exhilarating. I mean, I don't know. I remember as an adolescent also feeling like those were some of my highest highs. And so it's not all bad. I think that it's intense, but it's not all negative. One of the things I sometimes think about is almost that adolescence is one of the last time to build roads. And it's a good metaphor for the brain, I think, that if you think of all of development as this time when you're laying down the connections between different parts of your brain, different parts of your experience, eventually they're going to become these concrete superhighways where you only connect from X to Y. You only are interested in these two topics and you kind of develop a thing and you get really expert at it. In childhood, you've got dirt roads all over the place. Nothing is as highly functional, but you're kind of laying the groundwork. When the rain comes in, it gets a little muddy. But at the same time, that means there's also this great opportunity to reconstruct the roads. It's kind of your last moment when you can be, I think, really easily sculpted by your environment and also start to dictate your destiny a bit about what it is that you want to do.
Do we get better at controlling our emotions when we grow up?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
100%.
That's your answer, yes. Okay.
Yeah, we do. We get a lot better. I mean, I think that's one of the most fundamental changes that happens across the lifespan. To be able to say, I want to do something and to not have our emotions totally derail us from achieving those goals. And I think adolescence is one of the most critical places where for you to develop really good tools for your regulation toolbox.
But how do we get better at controlling our emotions?
When you're very young, your parents almost serve as your prefrontal cortex. They walk around helping you to manage your emotions, helping to control your environment, and so on. And through that, they kind of model for you what they do to regulate their emotions. And they help to give you supports, a little bit of cheat sheets almost along the way that teach you how to do it. And eventually, particularly I think during adolescence, as we start to see an increased ability to control ourselves in general, partially because of maturational changes in the brain, people start to get better and better at using different kinds of strategies for different emotional situations.
What is reappraisal?
So reappraisal is a broad class of strategies that in general is thought to mean changing the way you think about an emotional event so as to change the way you feel. So this is rooted in the idea that our emotions aren't perfect readouts of what's happening in the environment. So Shakespeare said this once by saying, nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And that's really the premise of reappraisal. The idea is that the way we interpret events is what leads us to have different emotional experiences. There's two particularly common types of reappraisal. So one involves reinterpretation. For example, if you be watching a movie and you saw somebody covered in blood, you might tell yourself, that's not blood, it's fake blood. They're acting, that's why it looks that way. So you're literally changing the meaning of what you're seeing by interpreting it as being something fundamentally different. Now, another way that individuals reappraise is distancing. You don't actually see somebody covered in blood as not being covered in blood, but you think of it as if you were a surgeon about to perform an operation. You see it from more of an objective perspective.
What is it that's interesting when it comes to adolescence and reappraisal?
First thing that we did to try to address that question was just looking at how people said they were feeling. We didn't see that many age-related differences. All reported feeling bad when they saw something upsetting. When they tried to reappraise, to turn down those negative feelings, that's where we see the really big age effects. So children, and to a lesser degree, adolescents, didn't show nearly as big of a drop in their negative experience as adults did. So whereas the adults, when they turn on their prefrontal cortex, when they start trying to reappraise something, we see this big drop in how bad they're feeling. We're only seeing a very small drop at younger ages.
So if I'm a teenager and I just got dumped by a guy,
Yeah,
I can use reappraisal to look at it in a different way.
that would be one way of sort of basically thinking about it differently, as if you were telling your friend what to do. That can be a helpful way of thinking about it. So it's not you dealing with it, but what would you tell your friend? How would you look at it if it happened to somebody else? Then it doesn't feel quite as personal.
Do you think it's more difficult for a teenager to put themselves in other people's shoes?
I think that one of the things that probably parents notice a lot is particularly that their teenagers are more likely to get caught up in themselves sometimes. or to also think more about what their friends are feeling than perhaps what their parents are feeling.
So why do you think our friends are so important when we're teens?
This is an evolutionary thing at some level, that if we didn't eventually have a little bit of a reason to leave the nest, we wouldn't grow up. You have to get a little bit disillusioned with your parents, or else you'll live with them for the rest of your lives. And similarly, you have to start to care more about what your friends think in order to be able to form mature social relationships. Peer pressure gets a bad rap, and it can certainly lead to bad outcomes, but it also is really important for guiding our behavior. So we learn a lot from our peers by caring about what they think of us and wanting to connect to them. That teaches us a lot. That's sometimes what leads you to want to do better in school. It's also the thing that might lead you to disobey your parents and sneak out at night. If we didn't care about them at all, we probably wouldn't be very good at being social agents, you know? You're starting to figure out what it means to have independence, and that's fundamentally part of what leads to your identity too.
Why do you think that is? I mean, why has nature made it that way?
If teenagers didn't have a little more push, a little more drive, I don't know that they would take some of the risks that they kind of need to take in order to become the people they become. We try all kinds of things. And I think that those emotions, whether they're intense desire or intense fear, whatever they are, they drive us to experience a variety of things in life. And that those experiences are really important for shaping who we become.
Traffic is busier than usual today, as a result of an agent walking down the center of the freeway. If you're in a rush, you might want to...
It is a hard time, but also a time of great feelings and joy, of experimenting how to fit into the world, of making all the right or wrong choices. No wonder then it can feel so overwhelming to be a teenager. There are so many changes going on at the same time. Our bodies change. Our perception of self changes. You stress about what your life will be like and what is to become of you. Somehow your abilities do not match your ambitions or the ambitions of others. Who am I? How does the world see me? Will I become famous? Do I want to be famous? Can I become a YouTube star or have thousands of followers on Instagram? Today it seems that it is normal to be special. If you want to be like everyone else, you have to stand out. As all these questions go round and round in your head, life expectations just get bigger and bigger. Expectations at school, for looking good, for being in, for being smart and having lots of friends, for getting high grades so that you have a future. All the expectations of becoming someone, taking the right path, the right education. Will there be a job for me? Will I find my true love? Is there a knight in shining armor for me? And how do I find him? How do I make the right choices? Terry Muffet is a professor and clinical psychologist, and her research has changed our understanding of factors that influence how our life is and how our behavior during adolescence has a profound influence on how our life turns out.
You've spent your whole career studying people's lives. So what makes the teenage years so special?
What science shows us is that the older a person gets, the more their natural personality fits with their environment. So as you move through life, you choose work that fits your personality. You choose a lover that fits your personality. You choose activities, hobbies, leisure activities that fit your personality. The trick to adolescence is moving through and making those choices in a way that really fits you.
So there isn't any special recipe to get a successful life?
I think the recipe is when you're in adolescence, you should experience everything. You should try new things. You should meet new people. You should go to new places. Really open yourself to the world. It's a sort of a process of learning to know yourself, but also learning to know the possibilities. So it's a very exciting time.
But do you really mean try everything?
For every species of animal, always the teenage years or the teenage months, if you're a rat, are a time when you leave from your parents and begin to explore. In order to do this, you don't know at the beginning when you try something if it's dangerous or not. So you should try as many things as you can. The trick to negotiating the teenage years successfully is not to get trapped. So you can get trapped if you have an unplanned pregnancy, if you leave school, if you try too much weed and too much alcohol and you become addicted. The idea is to be careful and to explore everything so that you have all the choices.
How important are the teenage years for our success later in life?
One of the things we know from our research, we have followed 1,000 young people born in New Zealand, all the young people born in one city in 1 year, and we have followed them right through, interviewing them every year until they're in their late 30s. So now we can look back to see what are the things that they did as teenagers that influence whether their lives turned out good or bad. And one of the important things that they had as teenagers was if they had self-control. And that seems to be the real key to negotiating teenage life in a successful way. Historians tell us that self-control is more important for teenagers now, today, than ever before in human history. We can get fast food very easily, so we must use our self-control not to gain too much weight. We can get addictive substances very easily, so we must use our self-control so we don't become an addict. Social media moves very fast. We must use our self-control so we don't respond too quickly and put something on social media that hurts another person. So it's a good idea that self-control is something that every teenager can use. Every teenager can practice it just by making themselves smarter and making active choices. And their lives will turn out much better as a result.
Am I born with a certain level of self-control, or can I gain self-control during my life?
The whole population gets more self-control as we age. The self-control is lowest in 2-year-olds. It becomes a bit better in primary school. It's kind of difficult for teenagers. In your 20s, everyone gets more of it. In your 30s, everyone gets a lot more of it. In your 40s, you have so much self-control that you're actually quite conservative. So the thing is to just think a little bit older.
That's why it's so boring getting older.
That's right.
Oh, no.
Who wants to be 40 and full of self-control and have no fun?
It has such a negative ring to it, the word control.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it's for yourself. So no one else is controlling you and you're not controlling someone else. It's you making decisions for yourself. It's a form of independence.
So self-control is the biggest predictor to whether we get success in life or not?
This is something that influences how life goes in the long run, whether you're rich or poor, whether you're bright or dull. Self-control is really important. If you're not born with it, you should get it. But how? How? You just have to think, I think. If someone goes through life in a thoughtless way, always just reacting to others, they're always caught off guard. They're always a little bit late making decisions. They're always waiting for input from others. The simple aspect of self-control is just thinking ahead. So anticipate what might happen and think, what will I do?
Teenagers face a lot of biological changes, and it almost seems like our genetics are being overruled in that period of life. Is there some sort of battle going on between those two, you think?
One thing that's important to keep in mind is genetics controls the timing of the biological changes. So when we follow twins who are growing up, we see that when they're 6 years old, they all lose their tooth on the same day. Twin girls start their first menstrual period at the same time. And so twin boys, their voice breaks in the same week. It's quite amazing, really, this timing. When you get older, twin brothers go bald at the same time. they lose their hair. Yeah. So genetics controls the timing of these biological changes that teenagers experience. That means some teenagers are going through these biological changes much older and some much younger.
Yeah, so there's some kind of maturity gap.
Especially if a girl is getting her figure much younger than the other girls in her class. She's still thinking like a child, but she looks like a woman. And that can be a very difficult time.
If you were sitting in front of a teenager right now and you could give one advice on how to live the good life, what would you say?
I think the best way to live the good life is to be open to everything, be open to experience, try everything you can, but just be careful.
On this journey, I've learned so much about myself, and I feel like I'm almost bursting with knowledge about the teenage life and brain. But what am I supposed to do with all of this knowledge? I mean, does it change anything?
The scientific knowledge helps us to understand the brain is changing in a way that pushes teenagers out to try new things. They think really fast, very efficiently. Their brain works much better than an adult's. So we should just trust them. It's a natural stage of development. They're supposed to try new things. They're supposed to make mistakes. That's great. It would be terrible if they didn't. So they're at a stage of life that is the most able to cope with everything that happens to them. So we should just trust that they will be able to do it.
There are so many possibilities, so many dreams to fulfill, so many adventures to be lived. We all make mistakes, but that's what we call experience. We make more mistakes when we are young. So perhaps thinking a bit ahead is not such a bad idea. I guess we all end up finding our place in the world, finding our direction. You decide. Life is here. Life is now.